So welcome again to the Six Conversations. We want to start this little overview and introduction to the conversations with an acknowledgement of the source of this work, which is the work of Peter Block, a consultant and community organizer, and in particular, this book, Community, the Structure of Belonging, which he wrote in 2008. And so we're using a lot of his words from that book. We're using the method that he outlined there. And in it, he does talk about how, what the lineage is of that work and what he's building on. And this is a model that has that particular source. We know that putting an old white man and his book on a pedestal is a pattern with a very dark history. And but there's also this thought that perhaps, people who have been in the belly of the beast, Block was a consultant, still is in corporate America, government, et cetera. Those people have a deep understanding of how that beast can be slain. And I really think that's what's going on here. In fact, Block wrote Community when he got kind of discouraged about the possibility that corporate culture could change and realized that people coming together as citizens, that's where a future distinct from the past really could emerge at the community scale. So he's naming the possibility that we can co-create in small groups a culture of restoration. And it's explicitly to replace the culture of retribution that patriarchy, colonialism, imperialism, all these power over and oppressive dynamics have created this toxic culture that's spread throughout human society now. And so the promise is that these conversations are a way to replace those patterns with new ones, patterns of liberation, of restoration. And we believe this promise. We've been living, we have lived experience of being in these conversations and of having experienced that transformation, of having understood their wisdom. We're still unpacking it for ourselves. Of course, they're not the only way that one could go about this by any means, nor are the ideas, as I said before, unique to him. But whatever the limitations in this method, we do think they offer a transformational path. And when we invite you to try as an experiment, you can have very short little bits of conversations. So, we don't want to overpromise what happens from those, but the questions work on you over time. The conversations do. And if you approach this with patience and a willingness to practice, we promise they'll take you somewhere.
And the way they do, at least for me, is through the questions. And the beauty for me as well, and that's something that Peter Block says, is that the questions themselves are the powerful tools more than the answers, particularly if we're looking for a quick answer to a problem. The discussion is gone, the transformation is stopped, and the future as well shuts down to some degree. The possibility may get lost with the answer. So it's about remaining with the questions, and powerful questions are those that really call in our own accountability and the commitment. They take us towards our own agency and away from outsourcing responsibility and blame. So they give us really like a doorway into co-creating and owning the future. And these are 6 conversations, and you can choose from them. And I'm just going to give you an overview. In the possibility conversation, we are not exploring goals or predictions. It's more about what is beyond our current boundaries. What is the future condition that is still beyond reach? And talking about it will create perhaps that act of imagination that will start making it possible and create it together. The ownership conversation asks us to act with responsibility and owning our part, not possessing, but owning our part in creating what exists right now. And again, that gives us a doorway into our agency of how can we co-create an alternative future. The dissent conversation, one of my favorite, gives a space for our no and our doubts and reservations in a way that makes space for a yes that has true meaning. And so it's about just being able to name that without having to fix or change. And it creates an opening for a commitment. The commitment conversation explores how and when our true promises are made without barter or expectation of return. So it's showing up with what we want to bring, and in a way that we can declare that there may be no promise that we are willing to make at this particular time. So there is space for that exploration. The gifts conversation is about valuing diversity and inclusion between us in the group and within us. And it brings forth the gifts of the margins also within us, but also in the community, into the center. And it moves us away from focusing on deficiencies or scarcity and into the abundance that it's already here. And last but not least, the invitation conversation gathers the community. It usually comes first, and then the other conversations can happen in any order. But since you're already here, we presume that you've been invited. So if you choose to have it again now, the focus will be more on how you may gather more people around the possibilities that drew you here and the possibilities that came from these conversations, or about what else you might want to invite a community to gather around. So not necessarily only people, but also new possibilities.
A little more about how the conversations work. They're based on questions, as Dita just explained, and they're powerful questions, which in Block's framework means they're ambiguous. It might not be clear exactly what the question means, and there's no responsibility to clarify that. It's up to you to make sense of it in a way that works for you, because they're also personal. And finally, they're designed to evoke anxiety. So if you do feel a little uncomfortable, that's by design and part of what's required. The theory is for us to really bring forth a future distinct from the past. If we're too comfortable, we're not going to get there. Which also means that it's fine to pass. There's a gentleness to these conversations. So you don't have to give an answer, or you might think back to a time in the past when you had an answer to this question in a different context and just tell that story. That's another very good way to get in touch with what each conversation is about. And then finally, this is an advice-free zone. So it's very important that we make no effort to try to fix or help other people in the conversation. That if someone names a problem or challenge, you're absolutely not to come in and start offering solutions. There may be a place for that elsewhere, but here we make the space safe for things like dissent, because we don't offer any advice. We get curious. We say, "Can tell me more," or "Why is that important to you?" But they should be open questions, not, "Well, have you thought about trying this?"